Well, good evening, everybody. We are so glad that you are here. I said good evening. I think it's official when you walk into church, it's automatically good morning. And so, good morning, everybody. I am so glad to see all the victims here. This is good. We really, honestly, when we were planning the evening, we didn't know how this was going to be received. I reserved a couple different rooms in the church because I had zero idea if this was going to be a one-on-one conversation or if it was just going to be me showing up. But you guys overwhelmed me with just wanting to know some things and wanting to experience some things here. I was reading not long ago from a pastor. There was a pastor about 200 years ago who wrote about what is needed for revival to happen. And he talked about we need a recentering of Jesus in not just in our hearts personally, but in community, in the believers' community. He said there needs to be a genuine repentance that is being experienced. And he talks about a couple of different things toward the end of this. And he talks about that there needs to be a recommitment to the Bible. And then there needs to be a commitment and a desire, a longing to want to know theology and doctrine. And I was reading that, and I was watching the sign-ups just tick away. And I'm going, man, I think this is what we get to experience right now. You guys are just as weird as I am wanting to know these things. And so we're really, really glad to do it. Now, a couple different things going on here. Hopefully you picked up a packet when you walked in. I get it. That wording is really small. The wording that you see on there, all that's going to be up on the screen, okay? On top of that, here in just a couple of days when we're able to get this evening recording put on our website, I will also have a truckload of resources. Some of that's going to be what you see here on the screen. And so you will have access to all of that. I just wanted you to have something to maybe kind of follow along with a little bit. It helps me stay on track as we're covering a bunch of things here. So the objective tonight is to address what was going on between the Old Testament and the New Testament. And so what we're going to do is going to kind of start back just a little bit because we need a starting place for this. I'm going to walk you through some of this. I am telling you right now, you will not hear every single detail, every single story from this. There's probably some even high-level stuff that you will not hear regarding this period of time. I'll have a couple different goals I'm going to share with you here in just a moment. I am fully aware that we're going to miss out on some stuff. We are only meeting an hour and a half. There are people who spend their lives dedicated to some of these things and still don't get to cover everything. Lots of things going on with this. But I do want to pray for us as we get started. So let's pray. God, we are so grateful. We are grateful because we get to gather like this. And Lord, while we may not be studying your word right here, we know that it is your word that is fueling what it is that we're taking a look at. God, most of all right now, I want to pray for the hearts of those that are here, for our community, for South Rock Christian Church. God, that it would be something that continues to mold us. It's what we get to hear tonight is going to be something that informs the walk that some of us already have. Lord, and I pray that it would inspire some of us to begin that walk right now. God, we come recognizing that all truth is your truth, and that includes history. And Lord, as we do this real deep, long history lesson, God, we do this in your honor, and we do this for your glory, and we do this so that we can understand how it is that your name is proclaimed above all others. Lord, as we jump into the mess that is humanity right now, God, may we be very mindful of the grace that you give to each and every one of us. And Lord, that's more than just an entry into a future salvation with you, but God, it is an experience that we get to have with you right here and right now. May that happen. God, we give this all to you, and we ask for your help in everything that's being said, heard, and experienced. For it's in Christ's name that we pray these things. Amen. All right, so we're jumping in right here. I wanted to talk here's what the goals for tonight are. Here's what the goals, the objectives that we have as we're moving forward with this. The first one is this. We're going to address the silent years, all right? And I'm going to talk about the silent years here in just a little bit, but it's about 400 to 450 years between the Old Testament and the New Testament. Lots of different things that are going on here. But it is my goal, my objective, to try to convince you that these weren't really silent years. All right? Some of you are going, yeah, you don't have to convince me. Some of you I know we do because all the time we call this the silent years. Secondly, I want to provide an intentional, intelligent design in the movement of this era. about 4.5 centuries, I want you to see an intentional and intelligent design. And it's for the sake of providing a context for the world in which Jesus entered. So we called this bridging the gap. I want you to see the bridge, how it takes us from one era to another era. All right? I want you to see this. Thirdly, I want you to have a richer understanding for your study of the Gospels in the New Testament. We have one more week in the Bible recap in the Old Testament. Don't everybody cheer at once, okay? All right. But here in just a week and a half, we start the New Testament. We have some people that have been meeting all week, spending a week in the Word, going through the New Testament. I want you to have an understanding, a fuller context of what's going on in the New Testament, and hopefully this will help provide some of this. And then finally, I already told you we're not going to address everything, okay? So I want to inspire you to go do some research on your own. Go do some reading on your own. There is a ton of stuff that you can dive into, and I think this will fuel some of the things that are going on, and I'll hopefully get to turn you on to some of that. I apologize for all the scratching. I don't know what that is, but we're going to keep plowing through all of this. So I want you to see the structure, a structure that we're going to be using as we go through here, okay? This is just sort of setting up a little bit of expectation. We are looking at the historical movement of this era. You have come in for an hour-and-a-half long history lesson, okay? If you do not like history, just close your eyes. I'll pretend you're praying. It's fine, all right? But there is zero ways for us to talk about this, address this, and understand this without diving into some of the history. If you're a history buff, history nerd like I am, what you need to know is we're looking at ancient history, all right? And I think this is going to help us put some things together. We're going to be looking at the political, social, geographical, and contextual climate of the people of God. It's going to sometimes feel like we're going away from the people of God, but understand that everything that we're talking about, looking at, is going to have have the people of God in mind. All right? And so I'll be bringing us back to that as we move through this. We're going to introduce you to words, names, places, and some terminology. I need everybody to understand something here. We are going to say a lot of names tonight. A ton of them. Some of you are going to cross your eyes as we're going through this. You're like, well, I don't know. Where are we going with this? We are providing some resources afterward that will be available that help you kind of work through some of this. I have a truckload of notes that's helping me. It will get confusing as we do this, okay? But we have to know what's going on with this, and I want to be able to address certain terminology, certain words as we move through this as well. All right? Finally, we're going to ask the question, so what? What do we do with all this information? Okay? Gene said I need to pass out a test to everybody to see what it is that you retain. So when I pass that out, you can be mad at Gene for this, okay? Sound good? There you go. Very good. No, we're going to talk about some key takeaways for this, okay? All right. I don't know what's happening here, but now it's starting to bother me. Are we switching that? Okay. Yeah, we don't need the other one. Hello? Check, check, check. Hello? Is this better? Hello, hello, hello? Yes. All right, there we go. Okay, we're going to do this. That's right. Everybody stay right there. All right, don't start the clock yet. We're going to put all this right over here. I will not walk over here. Okay, there we go. All right, so we have all of our stuff here. So we're going to end this evening. You got to give me a couple minutes now afterward, okay, because we just had to switch mics. But we're going to end this evening with some takeaways here. What do we do with this? What do I do with this information right here? So let's talk about this. What is the intertestamental era? What is this bridging the gap stuff that we're talking about? What is the silent year stuff that we're talking about? Well, first, it is the period of time between the testaments, like I said, somewhere between 400 to 450 years, okay? When we say intertestamental era, what we're talking about is the post-exile through the beginning of the Roman Empire. All right, so we have been spending the last several weeks, couple months in our Bible recap talking about when the people of God went into exile and now they've been released, and this is the time period that we're talking about, and it takes us all the way through to when the Romans show up. Finally, I mentioned this already, but sometimes it's called the silent years. You will hear people call this the Second Temple period. Now, why would we call it the Second Temple period? Because the Babylonians destroyed the first one, and when they were released, they came and they started building the second one. And this is the era, the period of time when Jesus enters in to the world. Sometimes you will hear people call this the Hellenistic Judaism or the Hellenistic Jewish time, Jewish era, something like this. So I want you to be aware of what's going on there. So where do we start here? Daniel chapter 2 is going to be the place that we start. Okay? Daniel chapter 2, the head of this image was of fine gold, its chest and arms of silver, its middle and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of clay. What Daniel was saying here, most of you know when you went through the Bible recap, is that he was interpreting a dream that King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylonia had. What do we do with this? And he said, well, here's the dream that you had. You have this dream of this statue right here. And each of these sections of statue, they represent a different kingdom. So here's kind of what this looks like, kind of a crude drawing here, but that's all right. The top being the Babylonian Empire, the next section being the Persian Empire, the section after that being the Greek Empire, after that, the Roman Empire. After that, this image says divided nations in Western Europe, things like this, but there's some other kind of different things that are going on with this. This provides us a perfect map for the intertestamental era, the silent years, the gap between Malachi and Matthew. It provides us a perfect map. This is the map that we are going to follow tonight. In Daniel chapter 2, a few more verses later, we read that in the days of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom and shall never be destroyed. Nor shall the kingdom be left to another people. It shall break in pieces all these kingdoms and bring them to an end, and it shall stand forever. So the people of God see this statue, and we go, all right, when are they getting broken? What we get to do tonight is talk very quickly of how all these kingdoms were broken. And we get to see all the different things that happen as we work through this. Essentially, Daniel's interpretation and his prophecy is about 10 plus centuries in the making. And we'll see a little bit later how we're still seeing it being developed, right? So 10 plus centuries in the making. So we're going to go just work through this historical movement right here, okay? Real briefly, we're not starting with Babylon, but we need to have a simple understanding of what the Babylonian Empire was, okay? We read most of the Babylonian Empire in the scriptures, so we're not going to spend a whole lot of time with this, but I want to walk us through real quick. Essentially, in the year roughly 3000 BC, we have the first kind of real civilization show up. And when I say civilization, I'm talking about how we understand civilization. Okay? The first one, about 3000 BC, is the Sumerian and the Akkadian period. So what happened is that this civilization, we call it civilization because this is where we get to see urban civilization show up, cities show up, irrigation. We have writings from this time. We have a city-state evidence and archaeology that we can find. There's an economy, so we see coins and we see different monies that are being used in exchange from this time. This is about the time that we really make popular things like the wheel. These kinds of basic inventions, we see evidences of it from this time. There is a guy named Sargon. He's a king. He conquers the Mesopotamian area right around 2350 BC. Okay? When he does that, he establishes a capital at a town called Akkad. This is where we first have our real first Akkadian understanding. We see Akkadian language. This is some of the earliest language that our archaeologists find, some of the earliest languages that we begin to read and we begin to study. So the stuff keeps going on right here. In this period, we have the word Babylon first mentioned in non-biblical documents. And so we have what's called the Old Babylonian period. And what happened here is the Amorites begin to migrate into Mesopotamia, where we have the Sumerian and the Akkadian people there. There's a guy named Hammurabi. He organizes control of Mesopotamia. And eventually he dies right around the year 1686. And when he dies, chaos ensues. This is going to be a common theme tonight, okay? When the king dies, everybody freaks out, okay? Lots of different things are happening. Well, because all this chaos ensues, we have this empire that eventually shows up called the Assyrians. We get to read all about the Assyrians in the Old Testament. Go back through the Bible, recap again, you get to read all about the Assyrians, not kind people. But as the Assyrian Empire kind of does what the Assyrian Empire does, it rolls us into what's called the Neo-Babylonian Empire. When you and I say the phrase Babylonian Empire, this is the period we're talking about. This is what we're talking about. What happens here is that the Babylonians, they exist, but they're kind of off on the side. And they steadily kind of grow, and they steadily kind of become this power that you have to pay attention to. And over the 8th and 7th centuries, they show up with this large migration of these people called the Aramaeans. Okay, the Arameans show up. They begin intermarrying, and intermarrying with the different people. So have all these cultures kind of intermingling, and they take the place of the Akkadians because with them they bring the Aramaic language. And when they bring the Aramaic language, they start establishing the area which they call New Babylon. Now, through this, there's a guy who shows up. His name is Nabopolassar, and he starts kind of being the official leader of this crew. And Nabopolassar has a son named Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar is the guy that comes in, destroys the temple, brings the Israelites into slavery, and is the end of the First Temple era. Right? So that brings us to what we're going to spend our time talking about. This is the Persian Empire. Again, I know on your map, you can't see very well. We'll have this available to be able to download and that stuff like this. But this is what the Persian Empire ends up looking like on a map. The Persian Empire was first ruled by a guy named Cyrus II. We eventually call him Cyrus the Great. Tonight, we get to spend all our time with all the greats, okay? There's going to be all kinds of the greats going on. Cyrus the Great, though. Cyrus the Great, he begins his rule in 559 BC. And at this point, Persia is under the empire of the Median Empire. And so we sometimes call this the Medo-Persian Empire, okay? And when that happens, this is the largest empire that the world had ever known up to this point. It's the largest empire the world had ever known. Well, right around the year 550, Cyrus rebels against the Medes. And when he does, he conquers, he takes over. And by 539, Cyrus is in charge of the Medo-Persian Empire. They are now a player in the field here, and they invade and take over Babylon. Babylon becomes no more because a lot of different things, not the least of which, God said, this is how this is going to happen. Our first empire has been crumbled. The head of the statue is now down. Now, when this happens, becomes the largest empire in the world, this is when that map that you saw just a little bit ago shows up. The surrounding cities and states and kingdoms at this point are really mostly self-governing. Everybody's kind of staying to themselves for the most part. Cyrus becomes very famous because I read one person said that he really championed the freedom of religion, and I would argue that he didn't really champion freedom of religion. He just kind of didn't care what you worshiped, okay? So I don't care. You do what you got to do there. He somewhat abolished slavery. He's the man that began to release the people of God to go back to their own land, to kind of reestablish their own culture, their own people. He allowed them to return from slavery, from the Assyrians, from the Babylonians, all these things like this. Now, the Jewish return, Cyrus is the one that initiates this. But it comes in three main waves. There's a couple other minor waves, but it comes in three main waves. You see this in your notes right here. The first wave happens with Zerubbabel finishing the temple. This happens in the year 515 BC. This is under Cyrus II's rule, All right, so this is where we are with this. The second and the third wave will happen under guys named Xerxes and Artaxerxes. If you were at this church this past Sunday, you got to hear those names mentioned a couple times, is during this time when we see the second and third waves coming. The second wave, we see with Ezra. He reads the law of Moses. You can see this in Nehemiah chapter 8. And then the third wave in 445 BC, we see Nehemiah championing the rebuild of Jerusalem. When this happens, Nehemiah is recognized as the first governor of Jerusalem, or the first governor of Israel or Judah, however you want to understand that. Okay, with that, we got to back up just a little bit, okay? There is a man named Darius, okay? We got to come back to Darius. This is Darius the First. He rules between 522 and 486. Now, Darius the First, no one has a problem with him until he takes his people and he crosses what's called the Hellespont, or if you look at some maps, it'll call it the Dardanelles, okay? He crosses the Hellespont or the Dardanelles. And so I need you to see this on our map right here. I cannot teach this without having a little laser pointer, so I get to practice that, okay? So right there, sorry if any of you kind of feel like a cat right now and it's just really bothering you. But it's this straight, just right in here, okay? I've provided for you kind of a close-up of that. It's just this small straight right here. The Hellespont is just this tiny little place. But, however, it is a strait that divides Asia Minor and southeastern Europe during this time, right? He's crossing a line for him. Now, this strait represents kind of a border where key trade is happening, where transportation would happen, or the only other reason why you would cross this is for military purposes. What do you think Darius is doing? He's not trading. They have everything they need. He's not transporting really anything except for troops. He crossed the line. And this initiates something really, really, really important. At this point, Persia begins to expand into these Greek kingdoms, okay? When I say Greek kingdoms, you have to understand something about the Greek people at this point. It's not a unified empire. They are all individual, independent city-states. Thrace, Macedon, Greece, Sparta. All these things, they all act independently. And because they act independently, what do you think they're doing with each other? Yeah, we ought to get used to this right now, okay? A lot of fighting going on at this point. And when they're fighting each other, they can't really fight off the largest, greatest empire the world has known at this point. And so he invades this. But what he does right here is he initiates kind of a new Persian philosophy, a new Persian mode of operation. We are now expanding kingdoms, and we're here to take over. And the Greek kingdoms are learning things like they are disorganized, they're disunified, they're these independent city-states. They don't care what happens to their neighbor because the enemy of my enemy is also my friend, right? Even though your friend doesn't really want to do friendly things with you. And so this is where we are. Now, this is a point where we are going to step into the Greek Empire, okay? Now, the Greek Empire, they're at constant war within, and they are vulnerable to these invading nations out from the outside. We've just established this, but there's a couple things that happen that are really important. First, we have these things called the Peloponnesian Wars. Okay, it's a series of wars that happen. Athens and Sparta, they're warring with each other. Persia comes in and they continue to dominate while they're warring with each other. And it's not a really good time for the Greek people during these wars. Now, I'm not going to go into this. There is volumes written about the Peloponnesian Wars. You can just Google it. You find all the YouTube videos you want on this. However, the important thing for us in here is this is a wake-up call to the Greek people. If we don't get our act together, we are going to get crushed. And so there is a man named King Philip. He's the king of Macedonia. He's King Philip II to just be squared away right here. So King Philip II of Macedon, he goes to these places. He goes, you guys want to continue to get your tail kicked here? Do we want to continue to argue about whose wood is better for building and who's got stronger navies, even though we're kind of getting smoked here, right? Do you want to continue to have these arguments, or do you think that we can kind of be something here? Now you have to keep in mind, I'm going to say this about 3 times as we walk through the Greek Empire. The Greeks believe that the Greek way of life is the way of life. And if we continue to allow other empires to come in and crush us, they're not just crushing us, they're going to extinguish our way of life. And our way of life is what's good, and it's what's beautiful, and it's what's worth everything. And this is what Philip II of Macedon kind of walks these nations through, these people through. Now, to understand something about Philip of Macedon, I know you can't see this too well, but I want you to get, this is anecdotal. This is purely anecdotal here, but I want you to get a feel for what we're dealing with moving forward, all right? We have records of King Philip II being married to 7 different women, okay? 7 different women. That's what we have record of. We don't know if there's more than that. So no fewer than 7 different women. What I have given you right here is there are 2. He married a woman named Cleopatra. Do you know who Cleopatra is? No, you don't. This is not the Cleopatra you're thinking of, okay? Now listen, almost every woman from here on out in the Greek Empire is named Cleopatra, okay? Almost every woman, all right? This is a wife that he has right here. With Cleopatra, he has a son named Carinus. We don't really know a whole lot about him, and a daughter named Europa, okay? In this time, Philip II marries another woman named Olympias. This is not Cleopatra, this is Olympias. So with Olympias, he has a daughter that he names Cleopatra. Isn't this a good relationship kind of building thing, right? So if you marry a woman named something, it's always not a good idea to marry another woman and name a daughter after the other wife, all right? But this is what he does, okay? Cleopatra, and he has another son that he names Alexander III. Alexander III is also known as Alexander the Great. We are going through our greats here. Now, to understand what's going on, Olympias has a sibling named Alexander II, whom Alexander III is named after. And because Philip wants to solidify his dynasty with his son Alexander, not other kids, he takes his daughter Cleopatra and gives her to her uncle Alexander II in marriage. At this wedding, there is this giant feast that's happening. Philip of Macedon is going, oh, okay, I need a break. I need to take a step out on the deck and just relax for a second. So he takes a step out on the deck. He has his trusted bodyguard coming. He said, you doing okay? And he says, man, we've all the wedding planning, all the ruling, all the stuff. I just need a moment to breathe. He goes, here, I got you a drink. Have this. And about 10 seconds later, Philip of Macedon is dead. Okay? All right? So we have no more Philip of Macedon. This begins our time with Alexander III, Alexander the Great, the Megas Alexandros. All right? Here is Alexander. Now, I want to pause right here for just a second and just kind of give us a little understanding of what Alexander the Great is all about here. We have heard of philosophers named Socrates. He had a pupil named Plato. Plato taught a man named Aristotle. Aristotle was hired by Philip II of Macedon to personally provide an education for Alexander the Great. And in this, we have all kinds of writings that they gave us, okay? In this, we learn that what is taught is that there is nothing as great as the Greek culture. Now, I want you to think of an individual who has the greatest trust fund in the history of ever. And he's being taught by someone who says, your way of life is the greatest that has ever happened. And we have to defend this at all cost. And we get to see the engine cranking with this. We have this arrogance that gets matched with this very talented young man named Alexander. He is 23 years old when he comes into power in the year 336. But man, he is full of energy. And so when he comes into power, he teams up with his mom, Olympias, to go kill dad's other wife, Cleopatra, right? And then they kill also the children, because we're not going to have anybody who's going to threaten us over this throne. This is ours alone. And then what he does is he picks up the fight that Philip of Macedon had with Persia. And so he goes in, he crosses what's called the Hellespont again, only this time in going from the east to the west, he's going from the west to the east. And so he's bringing the fight to Persia, which has never happened in the history of the world. And this is Alexander. Man, all of this just vibrato that he has. And he's unstoppable when he gets into Asia Minor. He's just conquering everything. This is where he's beginning to develop his nickname, the Great. He is chasing the Persian emperor at this time, which is Darius III. Okay, I told you a lot of names, right? Darius III, and what kind of the typical MO of this is Darius III shows up with his big army, Alexander the Great shows up with his big brain, and he starts destroying them, and he's all right, where's Darius, where's Darius? And Darius gets on his horse, gets out of Dodge, all right? Just runs away. His kind of motto is run away, live to fight another day, all right? And this is what he does. So he conquers Asia Minor, and he moves into Syria. We're starting to get kind of comfortable with this, right? He gets to the city of Tyre. And I'm not going to get into this, but you need to go study this. This is really, really important. Tyre is one of the most fortified places there is, and it's mostly because it's on this big swampy land by the coast. And you got about a little over a kilometer from Tyre to where you can actually sail a small boat to, okay? And it's about 6 feet of water, and they're bringing catapults, and they're bringing their army, and like, what do we do with this? And Tyre's just laughing at them because they're seeing them all kind of slog away with everything. So Alexander, I'm telling you, with all the vibrato, he orders his army to start digging up ground from under that 6 feet of water, and he builds literally an island to get to Tyre. And when he shows up, he conquers Tyre. He conquers Tyre, defeats them. He moves south then into Egypt, and I'll show you, I think, let's see if we got that map up here. Not yet. We'll come back to it. He moves south into Egypt, all right, to where the Egyptians are going, yes, Alexander, you're here. Finally, you're here. Get these Persians out of the way. They actually crown him Pharaoh, and they're celebrating Alexander, and Alexander's going, I don't know why you're celebrating me. I'm here to take over, okay? And so the way of the Greek is to make you Greek. And so he is here to destroy Egyptian culture so that you can now be part of the Greek culture. This is what he does. We're going to talk about that here in just a second. So he does this, and he builds a town called Alexandria. All right? You're going to notice something here. Everywhere he conquers, he builds a city called, I'm telling you, there's like 20 of them. Okay? Just everywhere he goes, Alexandria. Everywhere, we're going to build a city, Alexandria, Alexandria. But he builds the city of Alexandria where the greatest library has ever existed. Okay? So when we say Alexandria, this is the one we're talking about in northern Egypt. He moves north back up into Mesopotamia. This is just over a year later. He conquers Babylon, and then he conquers the capital of the Persian Empire called Susa. He conquers them. In just under a year and a half, he is now the ruler of the world. What has taken these previous empires centuries to do, he does this in just a few years. And he goes, well, I want some more. And so he keeps going, all right? He eventually chases Darius III away. Darius III has a governor. His name is Bessus. Bessus goes, okay, I can see how this is all going to play out. If I kill Darius, maybe Alexander will like me. Okay? So he kills Darius. Alexander, look what I did for you. And Alexander says, that's neat. That's cute. Good for you, okay? Not a big deal for him. But the idea was to kind of seize this. That's called the Battle of Gaugamela, and I only say that because it's really fun to say. If you say Gaugamela, it's a really fun thing to say. So he keeps going. Bessus ultimately ends up getting caught. He's executed by Alexander the Great on the charges of action to kill a king. Okay? So he tried to do this to impress him, and Alexander said, yeah, that wasn't that impressive. That's illegal. That's actually my job. And he's gone. So 331. And upon the death of Bessus, there is no more Persia. Persia's done. The year is now 331 BC. All right. Let's pause and talk about the Greek Empire for just a second. Okay? We need to have some understandings here. Greek Empire, you will hear or have heard the word Hellenism before. It comes from the Greek word Helle. Helle means Greek. Okay? This is where we get Hellenism from. Helle means Greek. Hellenism is the indoctrination, the preference, and the enthusiasm for the Greek way of life. Foreigners in Hellenism aren't annihilated, they are made Greek. This is sort of the philosophy that we have. We're going to create the greatest empire the world has ever known by making you Greek. Hellenism, Hellenistic right here. It actually specifically refers to teaching the Greek language, okay? It specifically refers to that. So the Greek Empire, here's kind of their culture, and we'll revisit this again here in a moment too. education. They revamped the whole education thing. What had been experienced is that you were educated by one person for pretty much your entire young adult life until you become an adult, and you can now educate someone else. We see this with the Jews, don't we? This is where we read the word disciple. You have one teacher that disciples you all the way through. The Greeks changed education. They said, you know what? What if we could put you in line with someone who is an expert on that subject? And so now you might go to school with, say, like 7 or 8 hours, or if my daughter was here, 6 or 7. Okay, sorry. Only 4 of you are going to understand that. All right, but you're now going from class to class to class meeting with these experts. Does this sound familiar? Yeah. They are deep, thick into philosophy, right? You are the rock stars of the Greek Empire are the philosophers. These are the famous people right here. Big time into competition. Big time into competition. They have now brought in things like art, sports, athletics, all for entertainment, and they value this. Does this sound familiar to us at all? Yeah. They're big into image. They are really, really big into, like, we want to see what it is that we can get the human body to do. All right, we want to see what we can do with this. So much so that they would, their sports they would compete with in the nude are pretty close to the nude. And so let's say wrestling, this is a big competition. They would take olive oil, they would just douse themselves with olive oil, and the winner of the wrestling match is either the one that's still alive or the one that has the least amount of dirt stuck to them on that olive oil. They are there to show off their body the most. Yeah, this is what we would do, okay? They invented things like the gymnasium, which literally means the place of the naked man. Okay, that's what those words mean. They invented this, and they value the individual. What is it that we can do? Reasoning, just pushing the limits on all these things. Humans, for them, become gods. This is sort of their religion right here. If you read their mythology, you don't go to where the gods are. The gods come to where man is. And this is what's happening here. You're not seeking out to enter into relationships with the gods, but the gods, Zeus especially, is coming down to make babies with humans. And this is what their culture is sort of revolving around. So we get to see kind of what this is. Now, this is the map of, again, this is hard to see. This is the map of Alexander's conquest. I'll show you right here. Kind of starts over here, and he works his way this way. And then after kind of his defeat here with Persia, he goes, you know what? I want to see what else is there. And he makes his way all the way through to India and even into what we know as Russia and into these mountains over here. Okay? This man in just over 8 years is conquering everything. He is conquering everything. So Alexander the Great, as he moves from west to east, he made it all the way to India, and he crossed the Indus River in the years 326 BC. And so what happens here is his men who have been fighting for almost a decade with him, keep in mind, their home is way back in Macedonia over here. They're way over here, a couple time zones away, right? And they go, hey, Alex, we miss our families. We want to go home. And Alexander, if you've ever seen the movie Braveheart, and you get to see William Wallace rally the troops as they're starting to kind of fall away, this is what he does. He stands up in front of them, and he gives like one of these greatest military speeches of all time, and just really works hard to rally the troops, and they go, nah, we'd rather go home. Also, one of the main reasons why we want to go home, we're tired of elephants. I didn't write it. I didn't make it up. I'm just reporting it. Elephants are getting hard to handle, and we're starting to find more people over here who will fight with them. And we have, war elephants. They're like the biggest tanks you can have at the time. And so they said, we want to go. And so they start making their way back. And we get all the way to a famous city called Babylon. And at this point, Alexander starts to cough a little bit. We don't know what's happening. Hey, I don't feel too good. And then he dies. And then he dies. He just dies. The year's 323. Now, we don't know what it is. Scholars are debating this forever. Some say he died of a fever. Some say he died because someone poisoned him. Some are saying he acquired some kind of sexual transmitted disease, which would not be impossible. One of his philosophies were to his soldiers were every time we conquer somebody, go find the noble people that place and go make babies with them. Because the way that we're going to turn this world into Greek is we're going to make Greeks. And that was his philosophy. So he had partners everywhere. We also know that he had homosexual partners everywhere. That he had the guy got around, literally, okay? And this is kind of his philosophy. So if he died of that, that's probably true. But the big problem is, any kids that he have aren't old enough to run an empire. So he conquered and made this empire. He just never lived to rule over it. And he has no heir. There is no heir to his empire here. And so the generals of his army, they begin to war over who's in charge. They're not just bickering back and forth, they're warring over who's in charge. We have battles and assassinations. We have what's called the Diadachi Wars. And we'll talk about that here in just a second. The word Diadachi means successors. Okay? And you'll see this pop up here in a moment. But I want you to hear something. Daniel chapter 8. The prophet sees a ram, which represents Medo-Persia, and a goat, which represents Greece. And the goat has a prominent horn representing Alexander the Great. And after Alexander's death, this horn breaks and is replaced by 4 horns, symbolizing the 4 divisions of the Greek Empire among his generals. I think I have this up here. Daniel chapter 11, verse 4. And as soon as he has arisen, his kingdom shall be broken and divided toward the 4 winds of heaven, but not to his prosperity, not according to the authority with which he ruled. For his kingdom shall be plucked up and go to others besides these. What we are reading here is what happens when Alexander the Great dies. This kingdom gets divided, and there's just constant war going on. And we're going to see what happens as a result of that. And so we have what's called the Diadachi, okay? The Diadachi. So the way this works, ultimately after everything kind of settles for just about 5 minutes, we have a general named Ptolemy I. He is now over the regions of Egypt and Syria where Judah is. We have a man named Seleucus I. He is over Mesopotamia and Asia Minor, kind of into that area where Antigonus I is. Now, Antigonus I is a pretty old guy, and we'll talk about him in just a second. He's just got parts of Asia Minor. Then we have 2 other guys that have smaller parts way out west, Lysicamus and Cassander. They have Thrace and Macedonia, far out, way out west, okay? What ends up happening here? These Diadachi Wars. I don't know if I have, yeah. Hang on to this. The Diadachi Wars. It's initiated by Antigonus. Okay? Antigonus is in his 80s at this point. And he's going, man, I don't have time to mess with this. Let's get this going. And he gets this war going on. And he moves east against the Seleucids. He moves east against Seleucus. And we have this battle that's called Ipsus, over the city of Ipsus, where Antigonus and his son Demetrius, they come to battle with 70,000 infantry, 10,000 cavalry, 75 war elephants. Pretty big showing here. But Seleucus rings up Lysicamus and Cassander from out west. And he goes, we're going to surround them. They form this coalition. So they're coming out from both sides here. Now, we're unsure of the number of soldiers, but we do know they show up not with 75 elephants, but with 400 elephants. Okay? All you got to do is wait here. Antigonus does not die of old age. He dies by a javelin. Okay? And this becomes the last kind of serious attempt to unite the Greek Empire. So Seleucus, Cassander, Lysicamus, and Ptolemy are the only ones left. There's our 4 winds. See that? There's our 4 winds. So what do we do with it? This is what that empire ultimately looks like. Okay? Ultimately is what it looks like. Now Demetrius, he escapes and he tries to reestablish Antigonus in Macedon, but it's just kind of a wasted try. And the Seleucids and the Ptolemies now become the most powerful by the year 275 BC. One of the resources you're going to be able to download is I put together the successors of that, okay? Just a couple pages of this. We don't have time to go through all of them, but those are the 2 big players in what we're concerned with in this study tonight. So we're going to be paying attention to the Seleucids. We're going to pay attention to the Ptolemies. Daniel 11 talks about the king of the south, which would be the Ptolemies, Egypt. And he talks about the king of the north, which would be the Seleucids. You also have another name with Seleucus. It's the name Antiochus. All right, so we are now firmly in the 3rd century BC. So what happens in the 3rd century BC? The Greek worldview and culture have now taken over. They have civilized others, and what they mean by civilized is we have made the world Greek. Man's reasoning and accomplishments are what we value the most. We have now moved into an age of reason, an age of individualism, of competition, of art and entertainment. We've developed cities, and we have installed theaters and organized sports and really celebrated the image of man. We've installed a new education system. We've now raised up experts on different subjects, and we've now taught that as better than a lifelong mentorship. The Greek culture has now become prevalent, and the Jews do not respond very well to this. It is offensive to the Jews. They're offended by the celebration of an individual and not the celebration of the community. They are offended by the elevated self, and they're offended by paganism that is everywhere, and they're offended by nudity that is everywhere. I mean, everywhere. So Judah, in the time of Hellenism, we see this right here. Between 275 and 250, the Ptolemies ruled over this part of the world, okay? And Judah, Israel, kind of is what's known as a temple state now, and by that we mean that the priest or the high priest was also the political leader. The temple is what kind of established the political direction that was going on. When they came back from exile, they go, all right, who do we make priest? Well, during David's time, there was a big debate. Do we have Zadok the priest, or do we have Adonijah the priest? And they said, no, we're going to make Zadok. He's of the line of Levite. So from that point on, the priest of Israel, the priest in Jerusalem, the high priest, is from the line of Zadok. So if you were to go look this up, you would see the Zadokites, okay? And so they reestablished this, and they resumed with a man named Joshua. If you were here last Sunday, you got to hear that name mentioned in the sermon. But Joshua is the one that we installed as the high priest. And this is what happens all the way through 250 BC. And then in 250 BC, the Seleucids decide, you know what? We're going to go after them. And so the Seleucid Empire comes under the leadership of a man named Antiochus III, and they come and they invade. And we get to see this tug of war back and forth. And in this process, Judah loses territory. They end up seeing how Antiochus runs over them, focuses on Syria, then moves into Asia Minor. And the Seleucids are starting to take over. They seize control over the entire Levant. What's the Levant? I'm saying that word because if you go do your own research, you're going to run into this word and you're going to be like me. What in the world does this mean? The Levant just means it's the land of the rising sun. When you look at the Mediterranean, it's the lands that are east of the Mediterranean, okay? And so the Greek Empire considered Syria, Samaria, Idumea, Judah, Judea. They consider that the Levant, all right? They're the land of the east. So you hear Levant, think east. And so they seize control over all of that. But at the same time, Rome begins to invade the city-states that are far out west. And they start conquering places in Macedon and in Thrace. There's some things with Sparta. Athens is kind of at stake here. But we're seeing gradually just teeny tiny Rome start to expand just a little bit. But they get to the spot where they cross that Hellespont line again. Rome has crossed that Hellespont. Now Antiochus has these wars going on multiple fronts. What do we do? And ultimately, he goes to war with Rome, and it costs him a ton. And when a political leader has to spend a lot of money, where do you think he gets the money from? Taxes. And so Antiochus III starts this, but his successors place a heavy, heavy tax on Judah. A heavy tax on Judah. This brings us to, and you can see what this landscape looks like there on your map right there. Now, this brings us to our Hasmonean time, okay? The Hasmoneans and the Greek Empire. Let's talk about this. In Daniel chapter 8, we still read this. Out of one of them came a little horn, which grew exceedingly great towards the south, toward the east, and toward the glorious land. It grew great even to the hosts of heaven, and some of the hosts and some of the stars it threw down to the ground and trampled on them. It became great, even as great as the prince of the host. And the regular burnt offering was taken away from him, and the place of his sanctuary was overthrown. We now get to see this happen, okay? We now get to see this happen. So, Antiochus III has 3 sons, which all 3 of them become successors. Okay, the first one is a man named Seleucus III, Creonus, which means thunderbolt. He reigned for a little bit. After him became Seleucus IV, Philopater, which means father lover. He reigned for a little bit. Then we land on a guy that we're going to focus on. His name is Antiochus IV. When I say Antiochus IV, you need to think Hitler times 10. Okay? This is probably the most vile person that's ever existed. Antiochus IV, he takes the name Epiphanes, which means God manifested. You need to understand that these names that these emperors have, most of the time they're given to them. Antiochus IV creates this for himself. All right? Now, Antiochus IV, he is paying heavy tax to Rome at this point. So he puts the burden on his region, which includes the Levant, Syria, Judea, Samaria, Asia Minor. He puts this on them. All right, Antiochus IV. Let's talk about this. Now, this is getting us to a spot where we run into the Hasmoneans. Now, we need to understand something here, okay? We've skipped a ton of years that's going on. There's a man named Ananias III. Ananias III is the high priest under the line of Zadok. He's a Levite. He's the rightful high priest, okay? We don't know what kind of guy he is, but Ananias III, man, he has deep opposition against the Hellenized world. He preaches consistently against Hellenization, preaches consistently with it. He has a brother, a little brother, named Jason. Jason is also of the line of Levite, okay, the line of Zadok. He is also a rightful heir to this. So what does Jason do? He does not go and take down his brother. He runs to the emperor, Antiochus IV, and says, here's some money, man, make me the high priest. So Antiochus goes, I like money, thanks. You're the high priest. Well, there's another man. His name is Menelaus. Menelaus is not of the line of Zadok. He is not a Levite, but he sees what Jason did. And he said, I've got more money than Jason. Hey, Antiochus IV, Epiphanes, why don't you take this money? And he goes, okay, fine, you're now the high priest. So we now have a non-Levite, a non-Zadokite as a high priest. Well, Ananias III discovers Menelaus, okay, discovers this whole plot. He also sees that Menelaus steals from the temple. He steals from the temple. And so he leads a public protest. And because he led this public protest, he's banished to a nearby place that's named Antioch. And at Antioch, when he gets there, he's assassinated. So now we only have Jason and Menelaus that are kind of at odds here. Now, Antiochus IV, he goes, I want more land. So he marches down into Egypt. I don't know if I have this on. Yeah, he marches down into Egypt. So we're gonna land on this screen right here. Comes down to Egypt. Again, kind of fun story. I'm going to blast through this really, really fast. He marches down to Egypt. The year is 169 BC. Antiochus IV goes to war against Ptolemy VI. We now have our north and south are going at it, just like Daniel had predicted. Okay? Just like he said. But for the Ptolemies, there's kind of a coup that goes on. Ptolemy the sixth has a brother. His name is Ptolemy the seventh. Okay? You tracking? Good. He's the little brother of Ptolemy the sixth. And he wants to be king. So Antiochus IV pretends to sign a treaty with Ptolemy the sixth. Hey, man, I got your back. Okay? I got your back. We're going to go to war. At the same time, Ptolemy the seventh, little brother, sets up his kingdom in Memphis. Not Memphis, Tennessee. Memphis, Egypt. All right? So in Memphis, Egypt. But he becomes a political puppet for Antiochus IV because he's playing both sides of this war. All right? Well, there's a sister of Ptolemy the sixth and of Ptolemy the seventh. You want to take a guess what her name is? Cleopatra. She says, hey, brothers, come together. We need to work this out. And reconciliation happens. Reconciliation happens. Guess who's not happy about this? Antiochus IV. Oh man, my plan to divide and conquer isn't working. So Antiochus IV gets run out of Egypt, and he is angry. And so he's so angry at the Egyptians, you know what he does? He kills 6,000 Jews out of anger. He's just mad. He kills 6,000 Jews. So he runs out of town. Antiochus IV leaves with extreme anger. He decides he's going to come back to Egypt, stops at the temple, he robs the temple, he kills these Jews, and then Antiochus IV attacks Egypt again. And at this point, Rome had showed up into Egypt. And it's under a consul named Gaius Papilius Laenus. Don't worry about that name. This is the only time we'll say it, okay? But because the Roman consul is there, he goes, Antiochus, no. You continue to do this, we're going to charge you more money. And so Antiochus IV does not know what to do. Gaius orders him to leave. Antiochus is stalling because he wants to develop a plan here. And so here's what happens. Gaius comes up to Antiochus, and he takes a stick, and he draws this line, this circle, all the way around Antiochus. And he says, don't leave this circle until you know what you want to do. This is where we get the phrase, drawing a line in the sand, right? This is where it happens. Don't step out of this circle until you decide what you want to do. If you stay in this, you're at war with me. If you step out, you go home. Well, Antiochus went home, but he went home humiliated. In the meantime, while Antiochus is fighting this, Jason, the Zadokite priest that bribed him, okay? He is appointed by Antiochus via bribe, but he heard that Antiochus IV was dead. He had heard he died. So Jason does what any good high priest does, and he attacks Jerusalem. Menelaus, the one whose bribe won over Antiochus IV, gets scared. He flees. He runs to the citadel, and that's where he's hiding. Well, Jason killed many with this terrorist act. Killed many with them. But he did not completely conquer Jerusalem because Antiochus IV arrives. He did not know the revolt was over, did not work, and so he attacked Jerusalem too. We have Antiochus IV attacking, we have the Jews attacking their own people. That's what's going on at this point. In this attack, he slaughters thousands. The writers of this time say that the streets were a river of blood. He tore down city walls. He attacked many of the pro-Seleucid Jews. They fought against their own people in this war, in this attack. And in the aftermath, Antiochus IV conquers, and he deems that all Jewish practices and festivals are now forbidden. He deems that daily temple offerings are forbidden. He bans the practice of circumcision. He burns all copies of the Torah that he can get his hands on. He sets up Greek altars all around Jerusalem, and he institutes a sacrifice to pigs at these altars. And if you know anything about the Jewish custom, you do not sacrifice pigs. Those are nasty, right? Then on December 16th, 168 BC, he installed an idol to Zeus in the temple of Jerusalem. And at this temple, in the temple, he deems everybody has to sacrifice to Zeus, and he says that what you are going to sacrifice is a pig. This, in Daniel 11:31, is what we refer to as the abomination that causes desolation. It's this very act right here. What are the Jews to do? Meanwhile, here's your screen. Antiochus sends people out all over the place and is there to convince them all that, hey, we're now going to pay attention to the Greek Empire. You're paying attention to me. So he sends some troops out to a village called Heshmon, also known as Hasmonia, years 167 BC. There's a man named Mattathias who's the priest of this village. And they say, hey, you need to come and sacrifice these pigs. You need to sacrifice these swine, all these things like this. Well, these representatives of the Seleucid government aren't very persuasive to him because Mattathias refused. Not only did he just say, no, I won't do this, but he slaughters the Seleucid government officials. Then he slaughters every Jew who did participate in the sacrifices. So he and his family, they pack up and they get out of Dodge. And he has 5 sons, John Gaddy, not who we think of, Simon Thassi, Judas Maccabeus, Eleazar Averon, Jonathan Aphus. They flee for the hills. They've inspired a revolt. And a little bit later, a couple years later, Mattathias dies. Okay? A couple years later, Mattathias dies. Whoa, I lost my stuff. All right, follow along with me because we're going to run way out of time. We got church this Sunday. Okay. All right, so Mattathias dies. The one to take over is his 3rd son named Judas. He receives a nickname, Maccabee. Maccabee is a nickname. That nickname means the hammer, right? So when you hear of the Maccabees or Maccabeus, this is who we're talking about. The nickname is the hammer. Now, he employs a military tactic called guerrilla tactics, which is really the only poignant way to fight the Seleucid army because they're so much bigger. So they're used to lining up, fighting against each other. He's got this teeny tiny army. What we're going to do is hide behind rocks, trees, and mountains and bush. And we're going to jump out, we're going to take out important people, and then we're going to hide back again. And it becomes this very effective thing that they get to do. He pursued, for him, religious and political autonomy. And this is what is effectively known as the Maccabean Revolt. It's what's effectively known as the Maccabean Revolt. Ah. Okay. Antiochus IV, as he's seen his army get picked apart here, as he sees his army get picked apart, he eventually withdraws from Jerusalem in 165 BC. Judas steps in and he takes over. He restores the temple on December 14th, 164 BC. When your friends celebrate Hanukkah, this is what they're celebrating. Hanukkah. This is December 14th, 164 BC. The next year, Antiochus IV dies of insanity in 163. Now it's Judas versus more Seleucids. Judas continues to expand, and I think I have a map up there somewhere that I could have showed you. It should be in your notes. Judas continues to expand. He wins Galilee and Gilead in the north. He expands Judah and the nation of Israel. Judas ultimately dies in battle, and his youngest brother, Jonathan, is his successor. Now, Jonathan makes a peace treaty with the Seleucids in the year 157. So we have a second of peace here. He gets named the high priest in the year 152. He is the first one to have the title king and high priest. Now, if you're Jew, that's a no-no. However, they are also aware of the prophets who anticipate a Messiah having both titles. The one that's going to defeat Israel's enemies and is one who's going to establish a new Jerusalem. This guy kind of looks like he fits the bill. What do we do with this? Well, Jonathan came to believe that he was the Messiah. Okay? He came to believe that he was the Messiah. So he broke the treaty, he ultimately gets captured by the Seleucids, and then he's executed in 143. Uh-oh, we have an issue. He's succeeded by Simon, his second oldest son. All right, we're going to start cruising through some things here, okay? Simon negotiates with Judah for their independence, negotiates Judah's independence. He's also named high priest and king. This is going to be a pattern. The high priest stays in the Hasmonean family moving forward. There is no more Levitical priests. No more, at least politically. Okay, he has a son named John Hyrcanus I. He becomes his successor. He removed all Greek influences, all the Seleucid influences around them. He expanded Judah to include Idumea and Samaria. But starting with John Hyrcanus I, we now have our first Jewish leader who has a deplorable character, just an awful character. In his efforts to get rid of the Greeks, he starts emulating the Greeks. In his attempt to establish a new Judean orthodoxy, he ends up increasing Hellenism. And this is the first time that we have in our ancient writings the words Pharisee, Sadducee, and Essene. It's the first time. So let's talk about this. Okay? Pharisees. Just so we have context here, because that shows up when we get to Jesus' world. Pharisees are from an influential group of scribes called the Hasidim. They are passionately devoted to the Torah. They strongly oppose cultural influences, specifically Hellenism. They are really good with Simon because he's pursuing independence, right? And he's really good with them because at first he was getting rid of all the Greek influences. But they broke ties with the Hasmoneans with John Hyrcanus I being named both high priest and king. So there, all right, what do we do now? How do we do this? Okay, the Sadducees. These guys first appear as a party supporting the Hasmoneans and John Hyrcanus I and all his successors. Okay? They are very wealthy people. They're from aristocratic Jewish families. There we go. They are pro-Hellenization, and eventually they are actually mostly pro-Roman Empire. They are all about power, the upper class. They don't have any time for you common Jewish people. They don't have any time for you. They accepted Torah strictly as instruction, but they don't see the divinity in there. They are against miracles. And this is one of the groups that Jesus bumps himself up against. All right? The Essenes, we see them show up here. This is a movement led by a man named Morad Zedek. There we go. He's known as the teacher of righteousness. And this movement starts as a response to Hellenistic ways. They oppose non-Zadokite priesthood. We have an issue with you Hasmoneans. They become known as the desert dwellers. They're about ritual purity. They observe the Torah. They are about preserving Scripture. We have the Essene Library now as of 1947. Okay, it's what's the Dead Sea Scrolls. Completely different story. I'd love to tell you about it later. We don't have time tonight. However, they championed celibacy, purity, ritual purity. They're big into adoption. They're big into recruiting you into this movement. Their community, to be a part of their community, required a 3-year probation period. We want you to understand what it is that you're committing to. Most, or a lot of scholars think that John the Baptist is of this movement. All right, this is why we find him in the desert, okay? I don't know that for sure. That's why there's a question mark there, but a lot of scholars believe that. Now, John Hyrcanus I dies in 104 BC. All right, so he dies. The rulership actually goes to his wife. His wife, in all of our documents, is only named the Queen of Judea. We don't have a name for her. But she names her son, Aristobulus I, high priest. Well, Aristobulus I is not a big fan of this. How come everybody else got to be high priest and king? Mom. Right? So he doesn't like this. So guess what he does? He says, Mom, go to jail. He imprisons his mom, and he lets her die there of starvation. All right? So, son of the year, yay. Okay. He also imprisons 3 of his 4 brothers because he's close to one of his brothers named Antigonus. Antigonus. Then he assumes the title king as well. Now, under Aristobulus I, he declares himself the first king of Israel after he conquered the Idureans, at least the first king since the exile. All right, everybody else has been named or recognized as king. He's the first one that declares himself king. Now, he marries a lady named Salome Alexandra. Okay, Salome Alexandra is his wife. She's going to show up here in just a second, but what we need to know is that Salome Alexandra, she kind of plays a part dividing Antigonus and Aristobulus here. All right, Antigonus is off fighting battles. Aristobulus, as the high priest, he is conducting his priestly duties over the Feast of Weeks. Well, in comes Antigonus, and he's still wearing battle armor. It is illegal to walk into the Feast of Weeks wearing your battle armor. And so Salome leans into her husband and says, hey, I think he's trying to take over. And Aristobulus gets all freaked out, and so he goes and kills his brother. But then he dies shortly after that with no children. So we have one person left to rule the place, and her name is Salome Alexandra. Okay? Salome Alexandra. Now, Salome Alexandra, she releases Aristobulus the first 3 brothers from prison. She marries the oldest one. His name is Alexander Jannaeus. Alexander Jannaeus then appoints himself as high priest and king. See a pattern, okay? Well, he, as this high priest and king, he's a Sadducee party person.
he has this extreme clash with the Pharisees. And as high priest, he intentionally, at the Feast of Tabernacles, pours out the libations not on the altar, but on his own feet. Well, this does not make people happy, right? Everybody's upset here, especially the Pharisees. And you know what they do? They start chanting at him, "Son of a captive woman, son of a captive woman, son of a captive woman." Them is fighting words, right? This is highly insulting. Then the Pharisees threw a fruit called etrogim, which is just basically a lumpy orange or a lumpy lemon. They start throwing it at him. Well, Alexander the Jannaeus is not happy about this. And so you know what he does? He kills 6,000 of them. He then builds barriers around the temple so that Sadducees are the only ones that have access. But what he doesn't understand that he does is he ignites the pro-Pharisaic movement, and it begins to grow. The Pharisees are now in alliance with the Seleucid king. His name is Demetrius III. Think about this for a minute. They defeat Alexander Jannaeus at a place called Shechem, and then they kill all of his mercenaries. Well, Alexander Jannaeus flees for the hills, but people start to feel sorry for him. And there are 6,000 who are in this revolt who go, "Hey, we want to come back to your team." And so Demetrius withdraws when he sees this. He goes back to Syria. Alexander Jannaeus says, "Yeah, you guys can come back on my team." And then he captures them, captures 800 of them, brings them to Jerusalem, executes their wives and their children in front of them. And then not only does he execute them, he crucifies them. 800 crosses just dotting the landscape. Alexander Jannaeus dies in the year 76, and finally Queen Salome Alexandra is ruling. Queen Salome Alexandra. She comes not from a Sadducean heritage, but a Pharisaic heritage. And during this civil war, she actually hides many of the Pharisees. She's the one that is ruling when the great Sanhedrin is established. We read this in Josephus. The great Sanhedrin is the religious legislative party where they assign 70 leaders and the high priest. They're the political and judicial functional leaders of the region. Salome Alexander installs Pharisees as the dominating party in the great Sanhedrin. She assigns her son, John Hyrcanus II, as high priest. And finally, for just a minute, they have a period of peace and prosperity. Now, the great Sanhedrin, we call it the great Sanhedrin because there's minor Sanhedrins all over the place, okay? So think of Supreme Court and think of your local courts. That's basically what it is. The great Sanhedrin is where we find Jesus during one of his trials. And this is when it was established, right here. All right. Eventually, John Hyrcanus succeeds his mom. Salome Alexander dies in 67. John Hyrcanus, already the high priest, just slides into the king role. And he has a brother. His name is Aristobulus II. He rebels, and when the Sadducees see that there's some division going on, they say, "Hey, we're going to support you, Aristobulus II." And John Hyrcanus is ultimately defeated at the Battle of Jericho. And he loses his high priesthood, he loses his kingship, but Aristobulus goes, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, that's my brother. Let's go ahead and make sure he still has a salary." And they pay him from the temple. All right? So, we continue on with this. There is another man during Aristobulus II's rule. His name is Antipater. Antipater is an Edomite. Antipater is an Edomite, and he offers to be an alliance with John Hyrcanus II to regain the throne. But he's a manipulator. When he goes to offer this, he brings a group of people from the east called the Nabateans. The Nabateans come in, but they could not defeat Aristobulus. And Aristobulus II goes, "All right, I need some help with this." And guess where he runs to? He runs to a Roman general named Pompey. Pompey then comes and says, "Yes, we're going to help." And so he enters into Jerusalem in the year 63. But not only does he enter into Jerusalem, but he makes his way all the way into the temple and then all the way into the Holy of Holies. Big time no-no. Big time no-no. Now, ultimately, he dies in 47, and John Hyrcanus II and Antipater, they turn to the next general they can find, and his name is Julius Caesar. That effectively brings us to the Roman Empire. All right. Brace yourself, because we're going to cruise through some things right here, okay? All right, Roman Empire. These guys, it's good to kind of just reset here. The values that we have seen so far. The Jews, they value Yahweh as the means of everything. The Medo-Persians, they valued the king as the means of everything. The Greeks, they valued man's intellect and his ability to reason and what he could achieve. But Rome, they are now on the picture. They value government, law, and strength. Value government, law, and strength. The Roman ideal is statesmanship, not the search for truth, beauty, and goodness, like we have seen with the Greeks. They value statesmanship. They have a constitution. In that constitution, there's 3 branches. This is going to sound familiar. They have the monarch branch, which is what's called the consulship. They have an oligarchy, which is called the Senate. They have a democracy, which they call the assemblies. Their religion is that you fear the gods because they're the ones that hold it all together, right? And their culture is that really they just seize foreign cultures. They just copy and paste. So if you're to go read their mythology, all they did is took Greek mythology and changed all the names. They're just copy and paste. They don't really care about that kind of culture. They are a Hellenized people. In fact, the name Rome is Greek, and it means strength or one who moves violently. They absorb the foreign cultures, the ideas, and the religions. Now, there's 3 major wars. I don't know if I put that up there or not. There's 3 major wars that they fight called the Carthaginian Wars. There's 4 more wars after that they call the Macedonian Wars. And what ends up happening is they gain control over the west in these wars. Then they gain control over Macedonia and Greek city-states as far as things to the east. And then ultimately they conquer and destroy Corinth in 146, which is a major military fort. So by 188, Rome had most of Ptolemy and Seleucid territories. By 168, they had Ptolemy and Seleucid and Antiochus paying taxes to Rome. By 133, there's major social upheaval going on. And by the year 90, there's a full-on civil war. The Roman Republic is a player on the stage. They're a complex system of checks and balances here. Their goal is to prevent one person from being in absolute power. And because that's their goal, we have people who want power and they got to work around this. And this is what ends up becoming the first triumvirate, if you've ever heard that phrase. It's made up of Julius Caesar, who is very politically minded, and he is commander of the army. It's made up of Pompey, who is a statesman, and he's commander of the navy. And it's made up of a guy named Crassus, who's a general and very good with strategy, and he's the glue of the triumvirate. Pompey and Caesar don't like each other. Crassus is the one keeping it all together. Now, as the arbiter, Crassus actually dies in the year 53. And when he dies, we got all kinds of things happening, all right? Not the least of which is Caesar crosses a border called the Rubicon. You may have heard that before. It's like the northern border of where it is. It is actually illegal for Rome to have military in Rome proper, the city-state of Rome. He takes his army and marches all over the place. Okay? Not only that, it's not really your army. You actually rent them for a little while, take them back and return your army, and then when it's your turn to lead again, you go and go get your army again. Caesar stops returning his army. Okay? A lot of people interpret this as this guy wants to be in charge. Wants to be in charge. So, as Pompey's there, he's established a military leader. At this time, he's actually the elder statesman. He's eliminated the pirates in the Mediterranean, which is a major, major deal. Okay, because it was dangerous to sail then. He eliminated them. But he marches into Syria. We already talked about how he aided John Hyrcanus II, and he establishes Roman rule over Judea by 63 BC. At this point, Judea is no longer their own. They are a Roman province. The Roman Empire is in full control of the civilized world by 55. Then with Julius Caesar, he's the 4-time consul, four times in a row, 48 to 44 BC, which is unprecedented. He is ultimately declared after Pompey dies, and he's the sole leader that's still going, the dictator in perpetuity by 44. And he begins the healing of the civil wars. And he begins to make promises to Jerusalem and the legal nation of Israel. So he begins doing all of this. Now, this causes a bunch of people to kind of freak out. We have detractors going here. And it's led by a group of senators, Gaius, Cassius, and Marcus Brutus. They scheme to assassinate Julius Caesar. Go watch any Shakespearean play, and you get the gist of what's going on. And there's when they murder Julius Caesar after stabbing him a bunch of times, there's either 47 or 49 of the 300 senators who take a dagger to him. He tries to fight back, slips on his own blood in the floor, and there's so many stab wounds they can't identify who did the kill shot, but the official death certificate said he didn't get murdered, he bled out. So therefore, we can't charge anybody with murder, okay? Well, he has a great nephew named Octavian, who, by the will of Caesar, when he dies, is adopted by Caesar, which means he gets to inherit what is Caesar's. He is not happy. He and a couple other guys that are loyal to Caesar, they form what's known as a second triumvirate. Octavian, a guy named Mark Antony, and a guy named Marcus Lepidus, okay? Well, they take control of the army and of Rome. They defeat all the conspirators at the Battle of Philippi. Both Octavian and Mark Antony wanted soul power, and they begin to fight each other. Octavian, he's the one that wins the loyalty of the army. Antony gets a little scared, and he flees to Egypt, where he falls madly in love with a woman named... This is finally the movie that you've been waiting for, okay? We finally found her. And he now has the support of the Egyptian army, okay? All right, so we're going through all this. Octavian ultimately defeats Mark Antony and Cleopatra in this dramatic thing that happens in the year 30, where Cleopatra flees in mid-battle, leaves Mark Antony to himself. She runs off to Alexandria. Mark Antony thinks that Cleopatra is dead, because where'd she go? She must be dead. So he commits suicide with a sword. Well, as he does this, Cleopatra shows back up, and she's now very sad that she just saw her lover kill himself. Well, Octavian comes in, he's effectively won, and he arrests Cleopatra. Cleopatra says, hey, before you take me to trial in Rome, can I please go and pray to my gods? Octavian says, yeah, sure, go ahead and do that. When she goes in there, she goes and finds a couple cobras, lets them bite her. She dies of poisoning. And Octavian goes, well, that saves taxpayer money. So, okay. So the Roman wars end. The Roman Republic ends. Octavian is given power back to the Senate. That's unheard of. He gives power back to the Senate, to which the Senate goes, that's amazing. That's amazing. Who in the world would ever do this? This man is worthy of this, so we're going to give you some power. And he maintains legislative power. He's given the title of Augustus, which means illustrious one, and Princeps, which means first in order. Now, under Augustus, we now have our first official Roman emperor, okay? Economic prosperity happens, expanded communication happens because they build road after road after road after road after road. Government stability happens. They secure a Roman identity for the first time ever. He institutes a philosophy called Pax Romana, which means the peace of Rome. It is a Roman philosophy that is to maintain the peace at the highest order. Now, keep in mind, it's the peace of Rome. Don't care about you other Scythians and barbarians, okay? It's the peace of Rome. He has a son named Tiberius, who is his successor, and it secured, finally, the Caesarian dynasty. Now, we'll talk about Tiberius here in just a minute. At this point, we need to blast through. This is now the Roman Empire, okay? This point, we need to blast through the Herodian dynasty. What's going on with the Jews? Again, Rome, Pompey, and Syria, and the Promised Land. Antipater lost hope. They get Pompey to come in. He dies. Now Israel is paying taxes to Rome. Antipater makes nice with Caesar, now fully in charge. And Antipater is now named the procurator. That's just a fancy word that means basically a governor, okay? He's put there. John Hyrcanus II at the time is named high priest, and kind of, you can be the king of the Jews if you want. That's fine. So we have Procurator Antipater. Antipater has two sons that he names tetrarchs, and tetrarch just means a fourth. They're given a fourth of his place. One of them is named Facile, and he's given Jerusalem, and he has another son named Herod, who becomes Herod the First, who also has the nickname what? The Great, okay? He's given Galilee. All right, let's talk about Herod. Herod is this energetic, impulsive, ruthless, violent guy. When he gets to kind of move into this kind of king role, he's 25, all right? He seeks support from Rome. And when he does that, Rome says, yeah, you can be the king. So in 39 BC, he's named king of the Jews, to which he goes, I'm going to be the king of the Jews. And he goes to battle with Antigonus, and there's this 2-year war that happens. In the meantime, he marries a woman named Miriam the First. Why is this important? Well, Miriam the First is the granddaughter of John Hyrcanus II, which means he marries into the Hasmonean dynasty. This kind of puts him in a place of some important inheritance. He is also at this time an ally of Mark Antony, who's going to battle with Octavian. All right, now, Octavian loses, Octavian wins, Herod goes, all right, we need to make sure that we secure some things here. So he's trying to convince Octavian to kind of keep him in the place that he's in. And when he does this, he actually kills off anybody who could potentially be someone who's going to overthrow him or a competitor. He just kills them, so Octavian doesn't have very many options to choose from. But he wins him over famously with a fourfold argument. He says, look at my loyalty to Mark Antony. That shows that I'm a good friend. Then he says, Herod, me, I was named king by the Roman Senate. Octavian, you're a senator. You were a senator when that happened. Then he says, hey, I tried to convince Mark Antony, this woman is not very good for you, man. Don't go following her. And then finally he goes, look, the last piece of this is I did not run away from you. I took the initiative to meet with you. To which Octavian is impressed. He goes, you get to be the guy, and they form this friendship, okay? It's a weird friendship, but you can see all of this. Herod now is the king. Jews are in contempt of this. Herod, under his kingship here, he held to all the Jewish feasts and laws and observances because he's Hasmonean. He built the temple around the temple. We now have what we know as the temple when Jesus shows up in the world. And you can see some of the metrics there. He built a harbor of Caesarea Maritima. He built fortresses, specifically of Masada and Herodium. He built many palaces, including his own. He built pagan cities, aqueducts, and roads. But to do this, he needed money. So what do you do if you're a leader and you need money? You tax people. And there was a harsh penalty if you were disloyal to him. He ultimately killed his wife and his 3 sons because he was a little paranoid of them. Okay? He ends up killing a lot of wives and a lot of sons. Not all of them, but he kills a lot of them. And so this is what's going on with Herod. And now the Jews, we have a certain group of Jews that are in a lot of contempt with him. He dies really dramatically in the year 4 BC. And when he dies, he has 3 sons left that he gives his kingdom to. We have Herod Philip, we have Herod Archelaus, and we have Herod Antipas. We know Herod Antipas. Okay? And so I lost myself here. He gives these, you can see the lands up there that he gives there. Archelaus ends up dying in the year 6. And so Antipas actually assumes Archelaus' region. His wife, who's also Antipas's niece. Antipas is exiled by Caligula as requested by his nephew, Agrippa I. And so we have all kinds of weird things that are going on with this. Now, at this point, Rome starts assigning what's known as a prefect. This is a Roman word for governor. They start assigning someone who's going to be in charge of an administrative area. Augustus, he disposes of Archelaus in the year 6. I don't know if I have that up there or not. Yeah. At that same time, he puts a census out in the Roman Empire. We read about this in Luke chapter 1. Judas the Galilean does not like this. The Galilean, he does not like this. And he leads a revolt. And this is what is the beginning of what's known as the Zealot movement. Okay? And there's this big time revolt that's going on. The goal of the Zealots were to remove all of Rome's rule out of Judea at all costs, violence and terrorist activity versus Rome and Roman sympathizers. And the revolt is ultimately put down by a guy named Coponius, or Copius, depending on what you read there. And because he was able to put that down and he assumes Pax Romana, Augustus says, you're the prefect of Judea, and he's the first prefect of Judea. And so he's the guy for, he's the first prefect there. He doesn't distinguish among all the Jews. So the Jews, they ultimately hate the Zealots because they got them into a weirder spot with Rome. Well, ultimately, Augustus dies. Tiberius takes over. And Tiberius, you got to understand something about him. He was very depressed. And what he was depressed about was Rome is now the greatest empire the world's ever known. We've run out of land to conquer. And so he stays inside. And he kind of just lets his buddy and general named Sejanus run things. And in the year 26, Sejanus appoints a man named Pontius Pilate as prefect over Rome. And we run into We run into all kinds of things with this. One of the things that we need to understand with Pontius Pilate, he's got a contentious relationship with the Jews, but he's also the successor of a man named Valerius Gratus. Valerius Gratus, during his reign as prefect, he inherits the high priest Annas. He's not a big fan of Annas, so he gets him out of there, and he goes through a couple different high priests, and ultimately he appoints Annas' son-in-law named Caiaphas in the year 18. And Caiaphas holds the position longer than anybody else in the Roman Empire. So when we read in the Gospels during Jesus' trials that he appears in one gospel to Annas and another gospel to Caiaphas, they're not contradicting stories. Right? They're not contradicting stories at all. This is what Pontius Pilate kind of runs into. And so we've set the stage for the time that Jesus comes in. So, what do we do with all this information besides, I'm tired of hearing Nick's voice, okay? I'm tired of hearing my own voice too. I want to walk through this. Here's some key takeaways for us, okay? First, Hellenism and Koine Greek. This was a massive, massive deal. Hellenism, when it took over and they learned the language of the Greek language, the emperors and the leaders of this, they didn't make it a formal language. They actually simplified everything, what's known as Koine Greek. And for the first time in the history of the world, the entire world is speaking one language. The entire civilized world is speaking one language. Every ruler from then on out learns Greek. Every land learns Greek. Every writing is done in Greek. It's so influential that all empires speak Koine Greek. Macedonia, Egypt, Syria, Asia Minor, Rome, the Hasmonean dynasty. Koine Greek is spoken more than even Latin. Rome may have conquered Greece militarily, but Greece conquered Rome culturally. There is a reason why we say Greco-Roman and not Roman-Greco. Second, to go along with this, because everywhere in the civilized world is speaking Greek, the Hebrew scriptures get translated into Greek. This is a big deal. This is what's known as the Septuagint. You hear the word Septuagint, or if you ever see anything that says LXX, that means Septuagint. That means the Greek translation of the Hebrew scripture. Now, the Septuagint, LXX, is the Roman numeral for 70 because there was about 70 elders of Israel that were brought into Alexandria, Egypt, because Alexandria, Egypt had this influx of Jews who came in because the Seleucids and the Ptolemies were all fighting, and they were like, we want to get out of town, and Alexandria became a safe haven. And so Alexandria sent for these elders of Israel. They sent them about 70 guys. And they said, hey, will you do this so that we can all read the text? We want to know what the scriptures say. So they translated it for the Greek-speaking Jews who lived there. It is estimated that up to 250,000 Jews lived in Alexandria during this time. 2 Kings 25:26 says this, then all the people, both small and great, and the captains of the forces arose and went to Egypt, for they were afraid. The text says of the Chaldeans. We're talking about the Seleucids. Now the Septuagint, the language of the Septuagint is the same language that we read in our New Testament. The Septuagint is quoted and recognized as sacred text of the early church. The Septuagint is used and is cited by the New Testament authors and writers, and even of Jesus, just so that you have a little bit of an idea of what we're talking about. Mark chapter 7 and Matthew chapter 15 references Isaiah 29 in the Septuagint. Matthew chapter 4 references Deuteronomy chapter 6 in the Septuagint. Romans chapter 9 references Isaiah in the Septuagint. We finally have a common spoken and now written language. That's massive. Third, the Maccabean revolt. Dramatic, we didn't even cover all of it, but it is as bloody and as corrupt and as dramatic as it could be, and as bloody and as corrupt and dramatic as it was, it did unify Judea for a century. It did prepare the Jews to get them to start thinking about the Messiah. It became a primary focus to rebuild and reestablish the temple and the temple way of life. Hordes of Jewish exiles began to return to Jerusalem because of the Maccabean revolt. It was a massively influential thing that happened, preparing the grounds for the arrival of the real Messiah. Next, the Roman roads and infrastructure, you will not find any resource that doesn't mention this. You will not find any resource that doesn't mention this. Roman roads and infrastructure. The Roman focus was military, government, and city development. They were expert engineers. There is city planning that they established that's still in use in our cities today. There's modern plumbing that they installed. Their roads were built durably, quickly, and with the traveler in mind. It is said that the road could be built 2 yards per man per day. Now imagine having a crew of about 1,000 people building these roads. And it started with what's known as the Appian Way, or the Via Appia, which is 250,000 miles of road in the Roman Empire. It is the first modern-day highway. Nothing could have prepared the spreading of the gospel more efficiently than the road system of the Romans. When we get to Paul and his mission, and when he's been convinced by this gospel and he knows that he's going to go convince, it does not spread the way that it spreads without these roads and this infrastructure. It doesn't happen. Next, we're almost there, guys. Pax Romana. The people of God have experienced at this point a violent and bloody history. Pax Romana was 200 years of Roman philosophical rule. It provided political and internal stability of the Roman Empire, of which Judea was part of. In general, Pax Romana prefers to spare conquered foreigners. In general, it employed and enslaved foreigners rather than slaughtered them. It sought to secure seafaring travel from pirates. It sought first to deal diplomatically with bordering nations and foreign nations. Pax Romana pursued first in good faith with those in the Roman Empire. Peace in the provinces went with the character of the prefects and the procurators, and the prefect was a lower-ranking person, and the only way that that person can move up in the chain was to do well with the responsibilities that they had. So doing good meant keeping the peace. It was a philosophy that valued dialogue and negotiation and quote-unquote free speech and the freedom of movement. It provided a stable economic structure that folks could depend on. This is the world that Jesus entered. Pax Romana. And our last kind of takeaway for this is we now have established synagogues because we don't have to all get to Jerusalem to worship. And because we've established these synagogues, the synagogues become an established center of worship and of study and of culture and of community. The local community becomes a core value of the people of God. We look to find others who believe like we do. And it models ultimately what church life is going to become. Now, all of these are important developments that set up perfectly the ministry that Jesus introduces in Mark chapter 1, verses 14 and 15. Now, after John was arrested, Jesus came into Galilee proclaiming the gospel of God, and he began saying, "The time is fulfilled, and the kingdom of God is at hand. Repent and believe in the gospel." This was Jesus' first recorded words in this time, in this context. These developments are unquestionably movements that bring the fulfillment of this time. Jesus arrived right on time in the exact right place with the exact right message. God was not silent. He was working the land so that the exact right crop would grow. And that's you and me. Daniel told us all the way back in chapter 2. And in the days of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that shall never be destroyed, nor shall the kingdom be left to another people. It shall break in pieces all these kingdoms and bring them to an end, and it shall stand forever. Just as you saw that a stone was cut from a mountain by no human hand, and that it broke in pieces the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold. A great God has made known to the king what shall be after this. This dream is certain, and its interpretation is sure. For no greater time could Jesus have arrived at the exact right time, the exact right message, that God was building a kingdom that will not be torn down. Now, I'm saying all of this because I'm hoping that we have convinced some of you that, man, the historical truth points exactly to the biblical truth. And if you are convinced by that, but you've never made a step into that direction, we have some of our pastors that are here, and we would love for you to find them and just talk with them, talk with us. We want to lead you in that. I also know that I plowed through a bunch of information of which I would have been done in the exact right time had I not had to switch out microphones, okay? But I think some of you will probably have some questions, and I want to be able to address those. I'm going to hang out up here. Please come up and feel free to ask questions. We are here in a couple of days going to have this talk made available on our website, along with the resources that you have in front of you, but a bunch of other resources that will help you make some sense of this. There's no way you understood everything that we just said. It just can't happen. And so we want to help you with this. I'm hoping we convince you that we saw God's non-silent plan that has been happening since the beginning. And it continues to unfold now. Let me pray for you. God, I am glad that we got to do this. It is a blessing and a treasure that we worship with people that find this valuable enough to come and listen to. God, sometimes we dismiss history. And Lord, when we do that, we know that we're also not paying attention to what you've been up to. But God, I believe wholeheartedly that there's not one single person here on accident. So God, as we have seen your mighty hand at work through what was just an incredibly dramatic time, we can continue to see your mighty hand at work in what is an incredibly dramatic time. And God, you are the same. You are the rock, the kingdom that no man can tear down. And Lord, when we pretend we can, you continue to reveal yourself. Lord, I pray right now for the one that's in here that hasn't been convinced or was struggling with this when they walked in, Lord, that your Holy Spirit was at work and would convince them that you are the King of Kings, the one that takes down all the rest of them. And God, it is to you that we place our faithfulness to. It is to you the one that we give glory, praise, honor, and all of our worship. And God, we know that you set up the exact right time for Jesus to come into this world, that while we were still sinners, he even died for us. And because of that, Lord, we get to live with him. And so, Lord, help us to grab that life right now and grab it for all it's worth. Lord, we love you, but we know it's because of this great love that not only you give to us, but that you have orchestrated. And so we submit to that right now, for it is in Jesus Christ's name that we pray. Amen. Thank you.